Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you, Walter.
Are we doing video, or did you just want to do audio?
Oh hell no, we're doing video, brother. We gotta make you look like $1,000,000, huh? All right. Oh, that's great, man. Thank you for taking some time to speak with me today.
Oh, absolutely. I love talking with anybody who's interested in listening.
Oh yeah, man. Let me tell you, the wide variety of topics that you have is something else. What I was really impressed with was this speech you gave in Bastrop, Texas, concerning this breakaway civilization.
Right. Yeah, that was, actually the book came out of that talk. I had done the research, I'd put that together for the talk, and as soon as I finished, we had our break, we got out in the hall, and I'm good friends with Joseph Farrell, and he walked up to me and he said, "You have to do this in a book." So I spent the next 45 days writing that book like wild, just sitting at the computer, putting that one out, and it's really probably it's definitely one of my most popular.
Oh yeah. It's a great presentation too. I don't know if the rest of your books you have them laid out in presentation form like that, but
no, I haven't. That was just because the opportunity, I was asked to speak at that event, and that was the presentation I came up with. But it sure did help writing the book, that's for sure.
I'll bet. Walter, I was fortunate enough to get interviewed by the Leak Project back in December, and also by Miles Johnson about 5 weeks ago. That was to make up for this interview we had this last November that had some bad audio and stuff. But the reason they interviewed me is because the book that I just wrote, which is called "My Family Created the National Security State," and then in parentheses, "No need to thank me." And so by that I mean, the CIA, NSA, FBI, all that stuff. It just so happens the way government business was done back then, one man wrote the check for all that, and that was my daddy's uncle. And he controlled the whole purse strings of the defense budget of the United States. And so I understand, as part of your story, that your father was an FBI agent. Or no, you're an FBI agent.
No, I was an Air Force OSI agent, but I did work for the FBI. I was an operational specialist. So
that's sexy. I mean, that's good. That looks good on any resume, huh? You got dang.
Yeah, and it was great for meeting girls.
Oh hell yeah! Right. Oh, that's great, man.
Yeah, my dad, of course, was Air Force. He was an enlisted guy who worked in a physiological training unit, which essentially, that involved running an altitude chamber and training the pilots on the effects of high altitude on the human body. And because of that, he had that really high clearance that involved him in the early days of Mercury. And I talk about this in the book Shimmering Light, but the Mercury space program was originally an Air Force program, and when they stood up NASA, they just transferred it over to NASA, the civilian part.
Right.
Yeah.
So a lot of these astronauts for NASA, they originally started off as being like test pilots for these crazy ass rocket planes and shit, didn't they? Or
yeah. It was. See, the U.S. space program was military 100% when it started, and about the time that the military space program really took off, they decided to split a civilian version of it into NASA so that could be the public face of the whole thing, and that helped keep the military program classified.
Yeah, fascinating. The one of the main pictures in my book that's talking about Michael George is a picture of him and Werner von Braun and Gerald Ford, the governor, and then the guy who is the head of NASA. I guess before Werner von Braun, but it's it's an interesting little anecdotal thing to see how that works. It's fascinating. With this,
it's interesting stuff, particularly when you look at the era in which it was developing.
Yeah, and all the crazy things that are supposedly going on today. If you want to, I personally don't buy all that. I mean, the idea that there is a breakaway civilization, I don't know, but a secret space program. Well, sure. I mean, that's just by definition. We gotta have a few secrets. But now, whether it's Corey Good over there, fighting it out with Martian commanders, while he's jacking off on an enchilada or whatever, yeah. So.
Hey, are we already into it, or did you need to stop and start the show?
We're full blown into it, brother. And let me tell you, yeah, that's good.
I haven't said anything embarrassing yet, so.
Right. Okay. So I'm glad you got that disclaimer. And no, man, my team really knows how to make these things look great, and so I appreciate you meeting with us, and I really feel like you made a good decision to come on here.
Well, thank you.
All right, man. So. It seems a lot of these Aero clubs and stuff like that, like the Sonoma Aero Club and all that stuff, is based on some Prussian education or the Prussian military system.
Yeah, interesting. You should mention the Prussian education. I was just talking with Joseph about all that stuff and how the Prussians are so. They got their fingers and stuff going back to the 19th century, here in the U.S. Yeah, essentially the Sonora Aero Club of California was one of several. And that's really interesting because our source on this, Charles Delschau, a German immigrant in the mid-19th century into Texas, he mentions casually that there were other groups, but he doesn't go into them at all. And that's a whole new thread of investigation that someone should do. But specifically, he focuses on the Sonora Aero Club, another group of German immigrants in California who, yes, were indeed, according to Delschau, developing this airship technology under the aegis of a mysterious group headquartered in Germany, which back then was like I think 48 Prussian states. There was no unified Germany in the 1850s. But the Prussian element was pushing towards the unified Germany. And there was this mysterious organization that Delschau called Nimza. And in my book, Empire of the Wheel 2, Friends from Sonora, I offer my speculative translation of what I think Nimza was, what it meant. And I came to the conclusion that it was indeed this Prussian organization, and it was developing this airship technology that would serve their unification goals and so much more beyond that. And again, if we look at the Prussian influence in the United States, they were trying to have their fingers in everything here, and not just here in the United States, but all over the Americas. And I go into that in the Friends from Sonora book, and then Origin, the book we were talking about a minute ago, based on my Bastrop presentation. So it's very interesting stuff.
Yeah. I've seen Joseph Farrell's presentation, or I think it was something he did on the Higher Side Chats, talking about Common Core. I think may have been what he was talking about, but as Common Core education system as it relates to this, or is this the stepchild of this Prussian interference or whatever it is, influence.
Yeah, we and Joseph, of course, is more the expert on this than I am. I'm not an expert on it at all, but it is a very interesting topic if people want to look into it, the research that he's done on this. But he points out that historically our education system was altered, and not for the better, by this Prussian education professional who came in and just changed how we go about educating our kids, and even college adults. It went away from more what Oxford and the other old universities would do, where it's critical thinking and you have to really make your argument. All your tests are oral, before a board of 3 professors, and we switched over to this system we've had for way too long.
Yes.
And it goes back again to this Prussian guy in the 19th century when the then unified Germany was just trying to totally influence and gain influence and power in the Americas. In my opinion, it was just all part of an attempt to grab at control over the resources, or at least to get as big a piece of the natural and other resources as they could in the Americas.
Well, that makes sense. Now, is this NIMZA an acronym for something? The
Yes.
word NIMZA? Okay.
Yes. Now, I explain it, of course, in my book, in a couple of my books. Del Chou spelled Nimza in a particular way. He spelled it Nymza in all capital letters. Well, we can assume that, or I make the assumption that that's an acronym. So from that assumption, I then went to what Del Chou said, that it was an organization headquartered in Germany. So we have an acronym of a German organization. Well, anyone who's been a linguist, which I was a Russian linguist for the FBI for a few years, and anyone who's studied languages and understands linguistics will understand what transliteration is. Now, there's translation where you literally, you translate the meaning of a foreign language into your own language so that you can understand what's being said. Transliteration has to do with how it's pronounced. So, for example, take Russian. It's in the Cyrillic alphabet. Okay, it's a different alphabet than ours. If you want to understand how that Cyrillic alphabet is pronounced, words in that Cyrillic alphabet are pronounced, what you do is you take our alphabet and you match the sounds of each one of the letters in the word that's in Cyrillic. And then you spell out a phonetic spelling in our alphabet of the word that is, originally in the other alphabet.
Right.
And
now I get it.
Yeah, it helps you pronounce it properly. Well, I think that Del Chou had done just that. The NYMZA, in my opinion, was a transliteration of the actual German language acronym. Now, even though they might use our alphabet, that some of the letters are pronounced differently. Like, for instance, the J is pronounced like a Y, like a Y, in the German. So,
okay, all right, like Jägermeister.
Exactly. There you go. That's one of the examples I use often. So what I did was I then literally looked for German words that, would have to do with what Del Chou said NIMZA was, an organization that dealt flight and airships and things like that. And I came up with an acronym, and I threw it past people that are adept at speaking German, and they threw it past native speakers. I've had a couple of people claim to be native speakers that come out and say, that's bullshit, that's wrong, and what their complaint is one little letter or one interpretation of a word, they can't come right out and say that I'm wrong, but you know what those guys are about.
Right.
But essentially, I came up with instead of NYMZA, it's NJMZA, and that was back in 2013. And I always have to read it out of the book, so I can grab the book off the shelf here if you want.
Yeah, grab the book, because this is the key point of the deal.
Let's chill out. Yeah, if I can get right to the page that, okay, let me see here. Okay, here we go. Essentially, what I came up with is the Nationalistisch Jagdflugzeug Maschinen Zalangsamt. Now, what do I say that means? Basically, in common usage, in my opinion, that would come out to be, let me find it here, the Nationalist Pursuit Exploration Airship Program Office. Okay, now the distinction I didn't say national. National would imply that there was a German nation, which at the time Nimza stood up, there was not. There were 48 Prussian states. There was no unified Germany. So there was no national anything. Nationalist, as we know, refers to a philosophy or
a yearning for nationalism. Yeah,
exactly. If you're a nationalist, you're
right.
There's these people that are going nuts thinking that if you love your country, you're a Nazi fascist because, all nationalism is evil thanks to the Nazis. Well,
right.
BS.
Of course.
That's an old Marxist thing that they like to whip out to beat over the heads of non-Marxists. A nationalist just means, in their stumbling here, in their point of view, their big goal was this German nation. So that was their position. They were nationalists, pushing unified Germany. So it was an organization founded by, in my opinion, the industrialists and the engineers and the political guys, the money power people who were behind nationalism. And basically what they were trying to do was to develop a technology that would serve both exploration, actual physical exploration for resources, all the usual reasons that people
exploitation.
Yeah. Now the pursuit angle, the Jagd, the hunter part of that, obviously implies the military angle. Well, they definitely wanted to develop this airship technology as a military tool as well. That was one of the reasons when you get into my book and the Delschau material and the other books written by, for instance, Dennis Crenshaw, for one, talks about how that was one of the problems the Sonora Aero Club had with Nimza, was that this Prussian group was pushing them to develop these what they called Aeros, A-E-R-O, their little airships. They were pushing them to develop them for military purposes, and the guys in the Sonora Club did not want to do that.
Of course,
they wanted to develop flight, but they didn't want it to be used for military purposes. And there's a whole intriguing story that results from that. But
that is the story, in my opinion. That's the story right there. I mean, it's how they couldn't co-opt it 50 years earlier because people didn't have radios and stuff. You were going around on horses and shit.
Yeah.
But it just finally came to where people had cars and radios, and then and the next thing you know, you got the FBI, right? And you got And my uncle was an FBI agent. Yeah. All
this interesting stuff, but so now there has been another translation of the term Nimza that has to do with New York, because in the mix of all the airship stuff, by the time we get to the airship mystery of the 1890s, witnesses and others talk of these unidentified investors from the eastern United States, and people have come to assume that the NY of Nimza, well, that must obviously refer to New York.
Right. Yeah. I remember that, and that's a good point. Now let me ask you, Walter, another thing I think that sometimes the people can get confused on, because this is a very fascinating story. Let's go over once again Delschau. I mean, Delschau, has he been dead for 100 years? How long has he been dead?
I believe he died in 1923.
1923. Okay.
Yeah, and he immigrated into the United States through Texas.
All right.
There were a lot of Germans that came in through Texas, which is, there's some significance there when you look at it from the perspective of intelligence and things like that.
Of course.
So Delschau immigrates into Texas because it's a lot easier to slip in through the Gulf than it is to go through New York or D.C. But he comes in with the mission, according to his own writings, of going to California, or coming to California where I'm at, and meeting up with the Sonora Aero Club to observe their progress and report that back to Nimza. Essentially, he was a Nimza agent.
Okay.
That's with small a, just meaning a representative, not like a federal agent or anything. So he gets there, and he likes these guys. He likes what they're doing. He's amazed at what they're doing. He gets along with them, and he really becomes a Sonora Aero Club sympathizer. This is in the 1850s now. This is the decade before the U.S. Civil War.
That's really hard for people to keep this in their mind, especially we haven't even started on the technology of these ships, and I mean it's just mind blowing.
Yeah. That in the 1850s, this guy is saying. Now, he's saying that they're developing flying machines. So, by the time we get into he's there in California for maybe a year or two, I guess. That's kind of hazy. But when he leaves California, he returns to Texas, and he spends the rest of his life there in Texas. And he starts in the late 1800s, about 30 or 40 years after his encounter with the Sonora Aero Club. He starts taking his diaries and doing artwork of all these little airship prototypes called Aeros. He starts doing these paintings of them, and he fills numerous volumes of these art books with these very colorful, intricate paintings.
They're beautiful. They must be worth thousands and thousands of dollars each. I mean, they're one of a kind.
Somebody knocked on my door.
Oh, don't worry about it, Walter. Somebody knocked on his door. It's easy to, when you watched all these shows and you know all this shit, it's easy to talk to these people.
You're doing great, man. This is the gift you have.
I mean, think about this the story. I mean, dude, it's fucking amazing.
It's
People
interesting.
going
It's entertaining.
Sorry about that.
It's like,
Solid entertainment.
yeah.
Plug yourself back in.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Got
It was the mailman. It was the mailman delivering a box. Sorry about that.
Mailman. Always rings twice, huh?
Yeah, at the wrong time.
Are you in California right now, Walter?
Yes, I am. I live in the San Bernardino Valley that I've written about in 3 books.
Oh, I didn't
Yeah.
know that perspective of it.
Mm-hmm. I've spent much of my life here. I went to elementary school in a town called Rialto, which is right here. And then we moved to Riverside for a couple of years. And then my dad's from West Virginia. I go into that in the books. He's Mothman country, if you guys are familiar with that.
Oh, yeah.
And I spent the first few years, right after I was born, we moved there. I was born in San Diego. And then we came back to California when I was a little kid, and that's when I lived in Rialto and then Riverside. Then we moved back to West Virginia for a couple of years and then returned here to Yucaipa. And these are all little towns right here in the San Bernardino Valley. I went to junior high school, junior college, and, this has always been kind of home, for better or worse. But I didn't know the things that I wrote about until 2007, when it all started popping up in very weird ways, and it blew my mind that San Bernardino used to be the garden spot of Southern California. We're talking in the very early 20th century. Before LA was a big deal. San Bernardino, which really is the butt of a lot of jokes now out here in California, it was the place that when tourists from all over the country and all over the world came to Southern California, they would make a point to come spend time in San Bernardino. There was a park here that on the 4th of July, they would have more people from all over coming to their 4th of July bash than there was the entire population of the valley. I mean, they would just get thousands. It was the Disneyland of its day. And it's central in one of the events in my investigation in my Empire of the Wheel books. So it's an interesting. That's a whole other discussion.
Yeah. Now, is it on some ley lines, or is it a power station of the world, or what is it? There is a major intersection of these telluric currents where the park used to be, there's something about this valley that
is what we call an open secret. There are, I would say secret societies, people that are really deeply involved in the occult. There's something about this valley that they're aware of, but it's part of the reason why San Bernardino just really went down the toilet, and for a while, and it's trying to crawl back up, but there's just some dark energy that keeps it bound.
Is there any local legends like ghost lights or spook lights, little glowing orbs?
Not that you've heard of, but what led me to my Empire of the Wheel investigation was learning about a ghost story. That a ghost that was being reported by employees of a store in a mall that we have here. And then I learned that mall was built where this park, in fact, specifically the lake at the old park, the mall is built on the side of the old lake. And where the store is, that's haunted, is where the woman who is the central mystery figure in the Empire of the Wheel books, it's where she was murdered.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
That's very fascinating.
Exactly. And so one thing led to another. I learned about this first from a local librarian named Ann Walker, and she told me, go look at the newspaper reports from 1915. You'll see it's there. It's all there. I think she was murdered. That's what she told me. I went and I looked at the reports. Not only did I find what she was talking about, but I found 6 other deaths, which I believe were murders, occult-motivated murders, that were associated with this woman's death. And then from there, it just kind of exploded. The more I looked, the more I found. Legitimate.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah,
that's
synchronicities
awesome.
galore.
Oh, I know it. And let me tell you, Walter, you had mentioned something earlier about the occult or some secret societies or something. I don't know if I told you, I'm an initiate in the OTO. So anyway, I was just going to throw that out there. But yeah, it's I'm always down for a good ritual and some black robes and all that stuff. So that's love a good ghost story too. That's when I said Ghost Light Road in Texas, it's actually has nothing to do with ghosts. It's these plasma balls that float in the air.
Sure. Yeah. I'm not aware of that kind of phenomena, and that is known in the area. What San Bernardino Valley is known for were satanic cults for a while, and Redlands, the city of Redlands over here, is considered by many experts in the paranormal field to be one of the most haunted cities in the United States.
Wow.
So do have that, but as far as like a natural phenomena, nothing that that I've heard of or come across that has made the what we'd call the widespread paranormal media. That there's no famous like brown mountain lights or anything here.
Okay, well let me tell you, and I'm not even pitching this. This idea is just coming in my head. I've already done 4 investigations at Ghost Light Road. It's over 100 years old legend. The state of Texas has signs and all this stuff. Every time I've gone down there to investigate, first I have had experience upon experience, and you're talking about somebody who's never had any experiences their whole life. Right. Any type of paranormal, anything, UFO, any of that stuff. Well, the third time I rented professional film gear and went down there with telephoto lenses and stuff like that, and I've just got some jaw-dropping footage, but I set out to take pictures of what is inside these motherfuckers. And I did just that, and there's entities inside there. And there was a wall of fear. Yeah, I've got them on video.
It projected fear at you.
Let me tell you this. I was looking at it through 400. I was looking at it. My voice. I'm not a scary motherfucker. I've been in some pretty tight places, okay. But there was fear in my voice. But my old lady, she wasn't scared at all. Well, see, I was looking through the telephoto lens of 400 millimeters. I was seeing inside there. She was just seeing the light.
So they were doing their best to project that fear into your mind to get you to stop looking at them.
Well, I don't know exactly what they were trying to get us to do, but I would be willing to I'll share any information I've got with you on Ghost Light Road. These videos or whatever. But I was just wondering if there was something like that in San Bernardino.
Oh well. Again, nothing that you could point to that other people have pointed out, but I think there probably are spots and places, absolutely, because an interesting thing, and I don't talk about this in the books, I do this for a very specific reason, but, as I said before, I experienced synchronicities all over the place, but I was also experiencing a lot of manifestations during the years that I was writing that trilogy. There's 3 books in there, and at one point, I'll be honest with you, after I did the 3rd book, I put it aside for a while. That's why I focused on the secret missions work and the breakaway stuff, because I had to just step away from the Empire of the Wheel stuff for a while. I just needed a break from it because of the weird stuff.
Well, now let me ask you this: the Empire of the Wheel stuff, that's related to the breakaway civilization, is it not?
Well, yeah. All my books. That's what I tell people. All my books, have a points of connection.
Right. I'm starting to see this. And so I can't wait to see what the point of connection is with your maybe your latest book, Shimmering Light.
Well, that one, the connection is the mysterious man and his family, essentially the Wilsons, the mysterious Wilsons, who I've talked about in, my gosh, probably 4 books now because they turn up. But the first time I ever heard of the Wilsons was my dad had an encounter with the one in the 2 of them actually in the 50s. And when
Wilson. I'm a Wilson.
You are?
Yes, I am.
Like which side of the family?
On my mom's side, my grandfather's brother, his first name was Wilson because of a Wilson up in there. But it's just
any of your family from Iowa or Kansas?
Well, no, I really don't know. But from Texas, but before in different ones besides Chicago, Illinois and Virginia, and
well, you're in
Oklahoma.
Texas.
Not Oklahoma, Louisiana.
Did you end up in Texas because of family connections or just because you went there?
Oh no, my family is that book about my family created the national security state. My great uncle helped create the 113th congressional district around Lubbock, Texas. So he was the original congressman for Lubbock, Texas, and then he finally ran against somebody who didn't beat him, but he lost his first election. That was against George W. Bush, like 40 years later when he was laying it down or whatever. But but Bush lost, of course. But anyway,
but you've got the see. Here's the thing: Iowa, Kansas, and Texas are the 3 places you look for with the mysterious Wilsons. So we'll have this conversation sometime.
That's a whole nother episode right there, guys.
But my dad was in the hospital in '91 with blood clot, and he was heavily medicated. At the time I was working for the FBI as a Russian linguist in Manhattan. And so I flew out to see him in the hospital here, and he started just gibbering about stuff, really weird stuff. So he started mentioning this guy Wilson, and I afterwards, after I visited him, now remember this was in the early 90s, so there were no cell phones. I get to a payphone and I call my my mentor, the guy who really got me started in my career. That's another story, but I said, hey, my dad's gibbering on about the Wilsons, some guy named Wilson. And he said, keep him from talking about Wilson around anybody else, and when I see you again, I'll tell you about Wilson. And basically, in a nutshell, again, this is a whole other conversation, but in a nutshell, when I saw him, he said, the Wilson your dad refers to is the most brilliant man alive that you've never heard of. He's this secret genius. And sure enough, as the years passed and I dug more into Wilson and learned more about Wilson and the mysterious Wilsons, that's what you find, is these are brilliant men who operate on this classified, out of the public eye level. And they are prominent in the book Shimmering Light, my book that you mentioned. and my dad's encounter with them, because this particular Wilson had everything to do with things to do with space and the others that the Air Force was involved in the 50s. So it's interesting stuff.
Majestic 12 type stuff, huh?
Yeah, even better than that. I mean, because we know the MJ-12 documents we know now, those are not what they're purported to be.
Oh, okay. Well, I didn't know that. This is just something, being a kid growing up on conspiracy theories and right, so.
Oh, there's something to be gleaned from those documents, don't get me wrong. But it's not, they are not what they are purported to be, but there's still interesting stuff that can be extrapolated from them, and has been. So.
Yeah. And it's, of course, an interesting perspective for me that Uncle George paid for every fucking dime of that stuff with the American taxpayers' money, of course. But, there such a job doesn't exist anymore where one man pays for every fucking dime. It just doesn't even make sense.
Right.
So on this NIMZA group that was trying to infiltrate the Sonora Aero Club.
Well, no, they actually, the Sonora Aero Club was chartered under NIMZA. What they were doing was backed and under the aegis of NIMZA. So there wasn't an infiltration thing. They were just trying to influence them to go in a military direction, and that's when the split happened. Okay, well, let's get down to the meat and potatoes, because when a lot of people, when they're thinking about airships, airship flap, this and that, they're thinking of like a Goodyear blimp.
Right. And they just don't fucking understand. What is it, Walter? They're not blimps, are they? No,
here's how you have to look at it. There is what we're talking about with the Sonora Aero Club, AERO is the spelling, and these were small contraptions. These were proof of concept anti-gravity.
There you go.
Is what they were, and they kind of look like fancy buckets or something underneath the flying apparatus. They were not dirigibles, they were not balloons, and this was in the 1850s. And then 30s,
in the 1850s, that is hard to wrap your mind around.
Exactly.
And if there's one shred of truth to it, it doesn't take a genius to figure out the world we live in there is a breakaway civilization. If they had shit like that back in the 1850s.
Secret space program. You're not going to be able to see it, but in my book, Origin, I have this chart. Well, it's backwards there because of the way the camera is. But there's a chart. Yeah, basically, what that does is it shows you the progression of the airship technology to give someone new to this the idea. The arrows, the Del Chou arrows, which are that right there. That's a half picture.
Yes.
I artistically cut that off there. That was like the Model T. Okay, if you look at cars, if you use the car analogy, the Aero of the 1850 was like the Model T, a proof of concept. Okay, then you go 40 years later to the Great Airship Mystery, which more people have heard about. And you have those things that are cigar-shaped and such, and those were like what a 58 Buick would have been to the Model T. Mm-hmm. It's what the 1890s airship was to the Del Chou Aero.
So what gets this motherfucker off the ground? I mean, is it counter-rotating fields of mercury or heavy metal or what?
It's the spinning. It's actually the bell.
The bell.
That's what I revealed. In this book here, I point out that in Del Chou's own art from the early 1900s, 1900 years, he did some drawings of a particular Aero that was built in the 1850s, and it literally shows the bell. In fact, I've got the picture here. We're talking about, I think, by the time they got to the 1890s, they were using something called gravito-electromagnetics, GEM, and this was a theory put out by Oliver Heaviside, okay, and it dealt with anti-gravity, and it dealt also with force fields that could, when you read the description, provide a protective, life-supporting shell around an airship, say, if it were to leave the atmosphere and go into space.
Right.
He's fooling with this stuff in the 1890s.
That's fucking unbelievable. What now? It's Oliver what?
Oliver Heaviside, Heaviside, and it's in my book Origin. He's in my book Origin.
All right.
And if you don't have a copy of this, I'm going to send you one.
Oh yes, thank you. I'm fascinated. That has excellent diagrams.
This is Del Schau's drawing of the generator device that powered the Aeros of the 1850s. What does that look like to you?
It looks like Der Glocken. It looks like the Glocken from Germany. I can't fucking believe this, dude.
Device, and see that central line going up the middle? That's the axis around which it spins.
And it looks like all these Hindu temples where they, those Buddhist stupas. It looks like a goddamn stupa.
Now you're looking at a drawing from, like the turn of the last century.
I know.
From the 19th into the 20th century, and that precedes the Nazi bell by 30 some years. Yeah. That drawing right there, and he's calling it a generator cone, and he's talking about anti-gravity craft. So I go into, again in this book, I go into the line of progression from this Prussian organization playing with anti-gravity in the 1850s all the way through the 1890s airship mystery into the 20th century, and show where the Nazis got this. In other words, I say that Nimza was behind the Nazis. Yeah. The Nazis got all their real Wunderwaffe secret science stuff related to the bell from this Nimza outfit, because they had been fooling with it and developing it for 80 years by then.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Now, the similarity between Der Glocken and these stupas that you see in this one particular Hindu thing, that each stupa has its own Buddha and stuff, but there's 72 of them. And I was thinking, wow, that's reminiscent of the Shimhamferish, of the King Solomon, the 72, demons that King Solomon bound up.
Yes.
Isn't that fascinating?
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that there were 72 of those stupas.
Yeah.
Don't you love it?
Yeah, everything works together. So, to me, what it looks like is the technology of intelligence agencies, or the technology of these secret societies, or them working together, somehow overcame the technology of the science of the Aeros and stuff. In other words, they got shut down, didn't they?
Well, the history of it is, as Del Schau says, that the leader of the Sonora Aero Club died in a tragic accident. Well, he implies, and others, again, I referred to a writer named Dennis Crenshaw, who wrote the first book on Del Schau, Secrets of Del Schau by Dennis Crenshaw. Mm-hmm. In that, he talks about Del Schau implying that the leader of the Sonora Aero Club was murdered for not going along with what the Nimza wanted. And after that, the Aero Club kind of fell apart. But what was interesting is, in the following decade, during the Civil War, a man named Solomon Andrews. Now, remember I said that Del Schau referred to other groups that were developing flight, but yet he did not go into details. Well, during the Civil War, a man named Solomon Andrews contacted Abraham Lincoln and told him that he had a flying machine that he wanted to demonstrate. So Lincoln, of course, was fascinated with this, and he told his Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, to meet with Andrews and see a demonstration of this device and to procure this, for the government and for the Union. And Solomon Andrews demonstrated his flying machine. There was a newspaper article written about it, I think in 1863. Reporters and several officials from the War Department witnessed this thing. But we are told that Edwin Stanton, Secretary of War, in the end, in spite of all this demonstration, in spite of Abraham Lincoln telling him to procure this, we are told that Stanton told Andrews, this isn't really useful, we're focused on the war, and we're almost done with this war, so no thanks. I propose that what really happened was Stanton followed orders, they procured this technology, and starting after the war, they stood up America's first classified black technology program. and that was to develop Andrew's anti-gravity airship technology. And that, 30 years later, resulted in the great airship mystery of all these anti-gravity airships being seen all over the western United States. And I go into the details of how that worked in my books.
It's fascinating. Just the idea that people were actually defying gravity in 1850 or 1860.
Well, and there you would have had, the first black program, really, the first really, classified advanced technology development program. And, you naturally, to protect that program, and this goes back to what you had mentioned about secret societies and intelligence agencies, you had these guys, many of them were Freemasons, and comments were made that a Mason would recognize when they would interact with witnesses. They were very open when they would be seen by witnesses to have landed and collecting water for whatever reason. They would show them the airship. They would identify themselves.
And an interesting aspect of it is they might have been under the clutches of these organizations that are trying to bloom and blossom and everything, but when at the end of the day you can just fly away. You know what I mean? They don't have like jet fighters to go after you with, or radio, or any of that shit. It takes 3 weeks to get the next airship over. One of our airships take 3 weeks to get it over here. Yeah, dang.
And that's what I think happened. I think that this had developed and really taken off by the 1890s, and they were flying these things around. And the intelligence agencies, of course, their first involvement would have been in protecting the technology, right? From, in this case, the Germans, the Nimza, and anyone else. They were involved in it just to protect it. But you had the secret societies from whence this ancient information that the technology was based on also involved in the mix here. And I propose in my research that what happens at the turn of the century is that these guys that are really making this happen in this mysterious black program for the United States, I call it the Aeron Project, because Andrew's original flying machine was called the Aeron. I propose that the guys that were really making the Aeron technology happen, the mystery airships, the 1890s, that they broke away sometime around 1903 because they did not like the direction that the world was moving politically and in other ways in the 20th century. And I think that's why they broke away. This is my theory on that.
Yeah, so were they some high-minded, politically correct thinking people, or was it that being up there in the airship actually gives you a different perspective on the world? You're literally looking down on the world, and so you see everything as geopolitical, but these people were running away from the authorities, and this is one of the few times in history where the innovative people had more, their technology was better than what the authorities had.
Exactly. Way better, and it was about ready to really explode. And here's the thing. These guys were very independent-minded. They were, in my opinion, based on my research, they were vehemently opposed to globalism in any manner.
Oh, yeah.
And they saw that in the 20th century, your bankers, your world bankers and such, were going to be pushing globalism.
Yeah, tyranny.
And
patriarchy,
the world wars and stuff, and I say that they realize, look what we've got with this technology. We don't like where things are going. Let's go do our own thing. Let's get the hell out. So this leads into why I say there are two breakaway civilizations. There is the Nimza, that German-based one, and they, in my opinion, are the globalists behind the whole New World Order thing. When we talk about that, they are behind the Nazis, so they're behind this Nazi International that Joseph.
They're the Third Reich or whatever, Maybe.
Yeah, they're that new Reich that is. They're the ones that are pushing globalism and wanting to control all of us. And this other group that I refer to as the 1903, because I think that's the year. They went off and did their own thing, and I personally think they've come back recently to get involved to oppose the Nimza a little more directly.
Well, you know what the next question is, because you say they go off, they did this and that, and that's what I was wondering. Where the fuck did they go? South
well,
America or what? You know.
well, yeah, and I'm glad you stayed earthbound on that, because a lot of people assume, oh, they must have some space
Oh, they
station.
went to Mars with
Yeah,
Corey Good. And,
well, what's interesting is the 1903 story is based on a rumor that somebody attempted to fly to Mars in an airship. That's
right,
another.
Yeah, and then the rumor that Tesla's went to Mars. And
Well,
there's, you know.
When you read the book, you'll see that I think there's a nugget of truth somewhere in there, right?
Mm-hmm.
We can't take it at face value, but there is a nugget of truth somewhere in there. Sean Castile and Tim Swartz have done some good research on that, and it's very intriguing. And when you look at it from the perspective that I presented, you'll find maybe it was possible. But yeah, I think that what it was is, sure, they're on Earth, but because their thing is an organization, an association of individuals who are like-minded, they're all over the world. It's just they represent their own thing, right?
Well, okay, well, right. Either that, or they're gone off into some secret high-tech city or something, you know. Which
they might have. They might have, you know, a central location where, you know, they advance their technology, you know, have their labs or whatever. But I think, you know, they wherever the other place is, I think they come and go here regularly. They're involved in industry and such here regularly.
They're known to exist by our leaders.
Yeah, I think that they and the Nimza figured out space travel decades before we're told man went into space.
Right. You know, that's, I don't, you know, I believe less things today than I did 2 or 3 years ago. You know, so,
funny
you know,
how
I don't, isn't it? Yeah. Man, well, that's just a fascinating story. But what do you think is the mechanics of these, you know, anti-gravity? It's the two. There's fluid going around in there, and then there's fluid going around in another direction.
It's you have, well, you know, you've got the counter rotating. The classic bell is two counter rotating cylinders that are slightly bell or acorn shaped, right? It kind of flares out at the bottom, and they spin on a central axis in, you know, counter rotation means opposite directions. But in between these cylinders is a layer of some type of mercury solution, right? And Igor Krakowski and Joseph Farrell, as Joseph Farrell also writes, found, you know, his source claimed that it was called serum 525, I think, is the number, and that's what it was. It was a mercury solution or blend, and this matches what other researchers have identified as a mercury vortex engine of the ancient Vimanas. Problem, a lot of people assume that the source on that is actually an ancient source, and it does turn out that there's some question as to how old the source of the mercury vortex engine story is. But regardless of how old that particular source is, it still appears to be legitimate. It's just not an ancient source.
Now, remind me who this German scientist was who got, you know, co-opted by the Nazis, but he noticed that the fish does not swim, the fish is swum. You know, the bird does not fly, the bird is flown. In other words, they're being drawn into these vortexes. You know how a trout just sits, and it wasn't Schopenhauer. That's a
Schauberger.
Viktor Schauberger. Okay.
Yeah, he was a forester. A forestry scientist, and he was studying water and flow,
well, you know,
just what you're
because
talking.
You have to have these, you know, engines like for these arrows and stuff like that, but you also have to understand the, you know, the dynamics of how to, you know, move that shit to the, you know, gravity fields.
Well, basically, by the time you get to Viktor Schauberger, what you've got is Schauberger's discoveries are applied to what the Nimza already gleaned from what the Sonora Aero Club was doing in the 1850s with the bell and whatever they stole via espionage from the 1890s airships, you know, American group developing those, and all this 70 or 80 years of development. Then they take Schauberger's discoveries and, add that to the mix, and that's how you end up with what the Nazis developed during, the 30s and during the war years.
That's amazing. Walter, let me tell you, I think we covered all the points, in some things that I was weak on from listening to your various interviews about this, the Sonora Aero Club. And tell us the name. It's a trilogy of books.
Well, there's the Empire of the Wheel.
The Empire
trilogy,
of the Wheel trilogy.
Which is about the San Bernardino Valley, and the second book gets into the Nimza. And I mentioned the Mystery Lady. The second book reveals who I think the Mystery Lady actually was, and I explore what the Nimza group had to do with this weird occult murder mystery I stumbled upon in San Bernardino. And then there is the Secret Missions trilogy, which talk about Juan Cabrillo and Sir Richard Francis Burton, and the new book, Ambrose Bierce, the author Ambrose Bierce, and those have their tendrils in the Empire of the Wheel stuff. As I said, all my books are connected, but those have to do with the lost technology of the forgotten ancient civilization, essentially, the Secret Missions books. And that has to do with this Nimza and this airship technology that we're talking about, because that's where these airship guys got this stuff. It was from this lost technology of the forgotten ancient civilization. So that's...
What about the elongated heads? Does that play into that at all? And
that's a
completely different deal
thing, but yeah, that's a different thing, but equally fascinating.
Well, yeah, and because I was down in Peru last year in Paracas, checking all this stuff out personally, and so that's kind of one of the things I look into. Walter, let me tell you, man, it's been thank you so much for taking some time out of your day to talk about your books. It's been...
Well, I appreciate you having me on.
Where can the listeners find you, like on a website or a Facebook page, or where's the best place that we can follow what you're doing?
Well, I'm on Facebook. I'm on Twitter. You can find my books at lulu.com. That's LULU.com. I also have a blog called empireofthewheel.blogspot.com.
Okay.
And I have a YouTube channel, the Walter Bosley channel, easy to find.
There you go. And we'll print all this up with the graphics and stuff when we put this together. And thanks for speaking with us, Walter.
Well, thanks for having me on. I look forward to talking.
Kick-ass day, huh? All right. All right, man. Bye.
See you later.
All right, man.